Hello, everybody. Tracy Mrs. JDog Flanagan with you here today. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Tactical Treasures Podcast, powered by JDog and Vet TV. Our podcast gives veterans, male spouses, active military members, and military family members a voice in the veteran space to speak about their service, how they're affecting their communities post-service, and they share with me a tactical treasure that has helped them in their journey in their military career, business, or life. Today, I am so excited to have with me Corie Weathers, who is an active Army mil spouse of 16 years and a licensed professional counselor, sought after speaker, consultant, and author of Sacred Spaces, My Journey to the Heart of Military Marriage. Corie has focused her career for the last 20 years as a counselor, specializing in marriage, divorce, women's issues, PTSD, and substance abuse. In 2015, Corie was named the 2015 Armed Forces Insurance Military Spouse of the Year, where she advocated for mental health issues and served as a media correspondent, writing online and print publications, consulting for command teams, and speaking to groups on issues like PTSD, grief, and marriage. She traveled to Turkey, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Persian Gulf with Secretary of Defense Ash Carter to visit troops and see deployment conditions. She has also traveled across the globe teaching individuals and couples how to live, lead, find purpose, and build relationships using their natural talents. Today, Corie is a clinical consultant working with service organizations to enhance programs, develop better team dynamics, and write meaningful curriculum. Working with organizations like the Red Cross, the Chris Kyle Frog Foundation, and Baylor University. After seeing the need for more competent mental health clinicians for service families, Corie created the Life Giver Clinician Directory, a modern searchable directory and map of professionals, including civilians, military spouses, veterans, and first responders. The Life Giver Directory provides a true win-win for families, clinicians, and service organizations needing to find referrals. Oh my gosh, what a bio.
I'm tired listening to you read it.
Well, that's amazing, ma'am. You've done such incredible things. I am so excited to have you to speak to our audience today. And thank you so much for your husband's service and your service, of course, ma'am. How did your husband and you first meet?
Yeah, thank you for having me. First of all, there's a lot in that bio, and sometimes I'm like, you know what, like let's just skip to the end, But I think it's really, before I answer your first question, I think it really is a testament to a lot of what military spouses do, which is trying to figure out how to have a creative career. Especially if you have one that is involving licenses and certifications that can make your career complicated, but it's also about how do you invest into this community that you've come to love so much, and do it in creative ways. So thank you for having me. To answer your question, my husband and I met in college, and we were
Oh,
part of a
wow.
larger group of people that just hung out all the time. And we joke now that neither one of us, liked each other initially, and eventually fell for each other. I pursued him, right, instead of him pursuing me, and I did a terrible job of it.
Oh, I
But I
love it.
eventually got his attention. We got married shortly after our undergrad. Literally a week after we graduated, we got married because we didn't know where else to go. We didn't want to go home. And so we just decided to get married. And then a couple years into marriage, my husband said he wanted to join the military. And I was like, this was not on our plans. This is
Oh,
not what
wow.
I thought we were going to be doing. So I told him, I made him wait a year and a half before I fully was in. But I'll tell you, once we decided to come in, we agreed to come in as a team and to serve this community as a team, which of course has turned into this community serving us as well. So yeah, it's something we love, but it's something we've always, since the beginning of meeting each other, knew we wanted to invest in people and love people.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's really great. And what a shocker for you that he said, "Oh, by the way, I want to join the military." Oh, that's really great. Obviously, you guys are a power couple, forging the military community together. So you've been in 16 years, right? So is there a particular aspect or moment of this military life that has stood out to you as particularly impactful?
Yeah, I think most people, and this would be what I've found across the board working with military families, I would say most people imprint on their first vulnerable experience in the military. So for a lot of us, it's that first assignment or that first deployment. And for us, that was our first assignment. So not only did we move away from family, who are in the Southeast, our first duty station was Colorado. So not only was that a vulnerable experience to come into a brand new community, fresh out of like civilian world, but we walked into the community during a time when it was before social media, before the community had shifted into becoming more of an online community. And so the neighborhood supported each other through that deployment, especially. And so I was really schooled on community and friendship and supporting each other and that camaraderie, both for my husband when he was deployed, but also for me back at home. And also that first deployment for us ended up being a historic deployment. We had a lot of losses during that deployment. We had 2 Medal of Honors that came out of one battle. And we now have probably 5 or 6 books that have been written on that one battle, and at least one movie that's come out of that as well. And so it totally changed the trajectory of what we understood military life to be about, but it also imprinted on us in a way that we left that first experience thinking we were just having the normal military experience. And it turned out it was not normal for everybody. But we definitely carried a lot of that, what it meant to support each other and what it meant to do life with this community because of those first experiences.
Right, right. And you're not the first spouse that I've heard say how their duty station was before social media existed. And, you had to forge those relationships within the community. And, that those bonds were very strong because, you meshed together without the use of social media and that sort of thing. So interesting that you say that as well. So now you're a licensed professional counselor and author of the book Sacred Spaces, My Journey to Heart of Military Marriage. So could you talk a little bit about the book and what led you to actually say, I'm going to write this book?
Yeah. I was one of those people that was like, I'm never going to write books because they end up like in somebody's used bookstore or, thrown out at some point. Honestly, Sacred Spaces, both books, I just recently came out with Military Culture Shift as the second one. And both books were not ones that I like ran to write. It was one of those things where I felt compelled to write. And honestly, Sacred Spaces came out of when I got that award in 2015. It really, that Spouse of the Year award thrust me into a spotlight that was very interesting to manage because as spouses, we are taught to just kind of serve in the shadows, if you will. And so when I got that award, I had the opportunity to travel overseas with the Secretary of Defense on that big, amazing plane that has United States of America written across it. And ride along with the press and all of his staff as he did his holiday tour visiting troops in deployment. And so I got to step out of the Army world and got to experience all the branches as they function during a deployment. So I got to experience the Air Force. I got to visit the Navy and the Marines on aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf that I only got there through a helicopter ride. I got to go to Afghanistan where my husband had been deployed on that first assignment. So I had all of these moments where I really genuinely had the opportunity to step into my husband's boots, if you will, from a totally different perspective. And I allowed myself, because I desperately wanted to understand what is it that we didn't get as family members. Like we would hear all these stories that they would bring home and we'd do our best to imagine them and try to understand it. But here I was getting to actually walk on the same gravel my husband had and see the same mountains he had experienced, not only daily experiences with, but also loss of his friends. And so I think I really wanted to lean into what it was like to close the gap between us, that gap of understanding that he would call these moments of sacred spaces that I would never fully understand what it was like to zip up his friends in a body bag. I would just never understand that. So I went on this trip and I just immersed myself in my 5 senses and really tried to think and put myself in his shoes and try to understand his experiences better. And in light of that, try to understand how he had changed and how I had changed and how could we close that gap and understand each other better. And so Sacred Spaces after that trip came out of how do I write about this experience in a way that helps couples understand each other's worlds better, to understand that each of us have sacred spaces, he's never going to know what it's like to raise toddlers and be at the end of your strength a year into a deployment. He'll never understand that. But if I could communicate it in words that closes the gap for those couples, then that would be my goal, especially after counseling so many of those couples. So same thing was true for military culture shift. When I wrote that last year, was really just, I had so much in my head that I felt like if this could be a way to contribute to new conversation, I felt compelled to do it. And it was my act of service, hopefully, to the community.
Wow, yeah, that how amazing. So, your book is not only for military spouses, but probably for active duty
Yes. That was very
spouses
important
as
to
well.
me. Yeah, very important to me as I would counsel couples, military couples. I mean, whether it was my husband, saying that these were his sacred spaces, or would work with other service members, especially if they were dealing with trauma. They would have when I say sacred space, it doesn't necessarily mean something is spiritual. It just means it is something that's set apart and something that changes the trajectory of your life. And you want people to tread lightly around it, but you deeply want them to understand it. And so for some people, that might be a miscarriage or a diagnosis of cancer, or for a service member, it was just being alone or being like bored to tears and somebody and playing spades with another service member and just trying to cut the time, right? Like there's these moments that just change your life and you want to be able to communicate them and not know how. So I wrote the book in a way that gave voice to service members and their experience. You'll read my husband's emails to me and how I tried to step in his shoes and say some of the things that I heard service members telling me on that trip that they wish that their family could understand. And also trying to write it from the spouse perspective that tends to be invisible for a lot of spouses, that we just get thrown into a category of, yes, it's hard and it's difficult, but it's still also the American life, right? And so how do we communicate these very extreme circumstances in a way that couples can share the book, even read the book together? There's couples discussion guides where it helps you communicate through that together. But definitely it was really important to me to try to voice and give word to both of those experiences.
Right. Wow, that's really incredible. Hello, viewers and listeners. I would like to introduce you to the JDog Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the prevention of veteran suicide and the healing of veterans' mental health. 100% of all proceeds received by the JDog Foundation goes directly to several foundations focused on the mission of saving veterans' lives. Each partner is hand-selected by our executive director, Jerry Flanagan, with input from the assistant director, Tracy Flanagan, and the JDog Foundation board members. Our foundation's motto: saving lives, one veteran at a time. Go to jdogfoundation.org to take a look at everything that we're doing there and the organizations that we're partnered with. You can also donate, and there's also a support line if you're in need of help. Thanks. Check us out, jdogfoundation.org. Your second book, as you've already mentioned, Military Culture Shift. So I believe that just came out. Am
Just
I
came
correct?
out. Yes. And it is
Yes.
very different from Sacred Spaces. So,
I'm sure.
which it,
I've read a little synopsis about it, and it sounds like principles of Department of Defense and 15 years of research, and
yeah,
oh my
it's
goodness,
all of that mixed together. I like to really challenge myself, obviously, but
yes.
and this was definitely a very big challenge for me. But again, I found gaps in conversation that was happening in our military bubble, if you will, in the DoD bubble, but also in the veteran space too. Really, military culture shift came from 15 years of doing counseling and traveling and speaking and really helping teams work together and seeing how all of the generations were really clashing, just like they always do. But in the military specifically, a lot of very big shifts have happened. You already mentioned in the beginning, social media being a huge shift in our community in the way that we did everything. And yet it changed things right under our noses. And now it's creating a lot of confusion, and there's a lot of leadership differences and values that are different with the younger generation and the older generations, and that's creating retention crisis, a recruitment crisis. And so I really wanted
Right.
military culture shift to be a little bit more of an intellectual book that really walks people through what all has changed. We all feel like something is different, but we're having a hard time putting our finger on it. And the answer is a lot of things have changed. And so the book needed to cover all of these different aspects of how things have contributed to where we are today. But I also wanted to, again, write it in a way where you could read your own story. So I walk you through the timeline of what has changed over 2 decades of, especially since 9/11, so that you are reading your story, whether you're a spouse, whether you're a military leader, or you're a veteran. You'll be able to read what it was like for you to go through those shifts as they were happening, and that you're not the only one. You're not crazy. Those things were different back then. Neighborhoods were different back then, and something is off today, and that you're not the only one, that all these things have shifted over time. And if we can understand our story and understand a younger generation's story too, perhaps we can lead better tomorrow. So that's the goal, is that yes, a military leader can read it and it's intellectual and it kind of raises your leadership thinking, but a spouse and a civilian should be able to read it as well and it not be over your head. And it tells your story. So that was the challenge that I gave to myself.
Wow, that's really interesting because, and it's kind of uncanny that the book has just come out, and I believe I've heard that young service members, our branches are off by 49,000
Yes.
that are not enlisting. So it's kind of interesting that that has happened, and this book has come out, sort of lending itself to what you just said, our younger generation, how they view the military and patriotism and serving the country and that sort of thing. So how
Yes.
interesting.
Yes, and all that was the other reason why I wanted to write about it is there's a lot of contributing variables, like Gen Z craves authenticity even in conversation, and that's not something our older military generation grew up being comfortable with. We're
Sure.
just now changing and being more vulnerable to that. But it's also, how do we address what they're asking us to do to expose some of the things that we really need to work on? How do we help our generation, which I'll say Gen X and boomers especially, are exhausted from 2 decades of war. Some of them are still reeling from the moral injury of how we left Afghanistan. And so
Yeah.
a lot of our generation is discouraging their Gen Z from joining. And so the DoD has a really tough situation of how do they both recruit the next generation and heal the current one at the same time. And so
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to arm people with the right words, perhaps, to raise your leadership to the next level so that it helps you do hopefully just that. And also realizing this is a system and an institution that's been around for a very long time, that's going to take a while to change. So like any counselor would say, it takes a little bit of like growth, but also grace at the same time.
Right. Right. True. True. Wow. Sounds like two incredible books. Wow.
Thank you.
Awesome. Good for you. So you are also the host of the Life Giver podcast. So somewhere in there, the podcast was born. How did that come about? And what is the premise of your podcast?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So it started because as a counselor, which I think is kind of also the books maybe were the same kind of extension of this. But as a clinician, I was moving from session to session, and I mostly only really work with military families, whether it's a spouse or a couple or a whole family. And so I would go from session to session and I would start to hear the same themes, whether it was like, man, all day today, everybody had this topic that they were working on, or just during this season, this is like the topic everybody seems to want to bring up. And I was getting to the end of those days going, man, if Josh would talk to Sarah, or if like we could have a big group conversation about this, it would really validate everyone's concerns and their anxiety and their frustrations that you're not alone. And so I wanted to launch the podcast as a way to take some of those themes that I was seeing from the counseling office and just put them out in a podcast and talk about it on a much broader level, obviously not talking about my clients, but the topic itself. And so
Sure.
the podcast has gone on for 8 seasons now. We've covered everything from intimacy and marriage to parenting topics, similarities to the first responder culture, brought on amazing authors and guests that contribute to military relationships. Last season, we did a little bit more on leadership. And then if I wasn't doing enough, I'll be putting out this coming year in 2024, just a very limited 1 season series that will go with military culture shift as more of a leadership, military leadership podcast to support the book. But I really just enjoy, as I'm sure you do, just having authentic conversations with people and really getting those conversations out. Because I think as we listen to these podcasts and conversations, we hear our own story threaded throughout, and we just feel a little bit more understood with a little bit more hope and maybe a few more answers to navigate whatever's in front of us. And I enjoy being part of that process, as I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, yeah, I do. I love this podcast because it allows me as a civilian to be able to give a platform for, male spouses and veterans and active duty, and people, even, military families that are working in the veteran space, a platform to talk about what they're doing
Well, and can I
and
say thank you for
and
doing
it,
that, because you're
yeah,
bridging the divide that I think is definitely there, and
yeah.
it's hard to do that. And so I appreciate so much what you're doing.
It it is, and I mean, I learn too. I mean, I'm the host, but it helps educate me to hear all these stories, and I think, as a civilian, I want to understand.
Mhm.
I'm in the veteran space as a civilian, with our company and everything, and it just helps me to be better at what I do if I can understand our
Mhm.
spouses and our military veterans and what they've endured and what they've gone through and really understand the sacrifice that they've given for the freedoms that we have today.
Well, and can I
So,
just
and
say that's huge. And I think we all need to hear that and we all need to lean into that. And it's just curiosity. It's just curiosity into someone else's world that may look a little bit different from yours. And with that curiosity comes empathy, comes bridging the human divide, that we find humanity in each other's story, and it inspires both sides, I think, to be better, or to grow and to contribute to closing that divide together. So I just want to like scream from the rooftops just how important it is what you just said for both sides, that we do that
yeah,
more often.
yeah, definitely. And for me, I just feel as a civilian, I have a responsibility to educate myself and
Mhm.
to understand. I'm a military family member and a huge patriot, obviously, but if I can open up the gateway to the civilian world, to hear the stories, that's what I seek to do. And thank you for everything that you're doing. Your podcast is great. How educational. I just love it. However, there's one more little facet, and that is the Life Giver Clinician Directory. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So again, so it came out of a problem that I saw, or gap, but I think some of the best ideas, not every idea succeeds, but as a clinician, I would understandably get a lot of military families that would come for counseling, and they would just be frustrated because they either could not find a clinician that understood their world, that could build rapport and connect with them. But I would just hear, unfortunately, just challenging or difficult or horror stories of their attempts to get mental health care. And so I also have a huge heart for teaching cultural competency to clinicians. So if you are a civilian and you want to connect with military, we desperately need more clinicians to serve our tribe, our population. And so I've also taught those civilians, how do you establish rapport very quickly. So it came out of that kind of frustration when organizations would call me and say, hey, we need to make a referral. Can you help us find a referral? And I was struggling to find these clinicians as well. So there are things out there that are like Psychology Today, where you can search for clinicians, but it's not normal, or we're not taught as clinicians to put out there that we're military connected or that I'm a spouse. We don't put out a lot of personal information, and you may not even think to put out that you serve military population. You maybe all you put on there is that you take TRICARE, but that's really hard for people to find you. And so I developed the directory to be kind of a win-win for everybody. It gave clinicians the opportunity to put themselves on a platform and market themselves to say that we're culturally competent and excited to work with you. And it put it in the hands of military families to search the directory and find someone close to them. And so I try to do what Psychology Today could not do and make those connections faster. And actually, since I've written that bio, you have already interviewed Evie King, who is this year's Spouse of the Year, who is the executive
Hmm.
director for Independent, is an organization of military spouses that are all about resources Independent has now acquired that directory. And so now they are going to house that directory as the military wellness directory, where it's not just mental health clinicians, it's now nutritionists and coaches that you can find as a military or veteran. If you need somebody that understands your world and can get you going quickly on whatever pathway of wellness you need, that directory is going to get you connected to people very quickly. Some of them are spouses, some of them are veterans, some of them are chaplains in the community, but they're all culturally competent in our military world and can get you going quickly.
Yeah, it was a great conversation with Evie. She was fabulous, and I just love the work she's doing. Hearing about independent and really caring for male spouses because
Mhm.
they have mental health issues too.
Mhm.
And a lot of times in the kind of the shadows, like you say, of their spouse or their, service member, they kind of get lost in the shuffle.
Mhm.
So yeah, she's doing great work there, and that's really amazing. So let's move on to your treasure. I would love to hear what you're going to share with us today.
Yeah. So you asked me before we recorded, asked me about, what is the tactical treasure? What is the thing that I lean on? And I had to think about this a lot because sometimes I think that we have these treasures that we get so accustomed to leaning on that we forget that how important they actually are because it's a consistent tool that we all use. But for me personally, I'm a very much out of sight, out of mind person. I literally can hide candy from myself by putting it in the same place that I put it every single time, but I forget that it's there. And
Love
that
it.
is a great for hiding candy from yourself. But when it comes to working on something in your life, I just found that I'm a person that if it's not right in front of me, it's very easy for me to stop working on it, forget that I wanted to make that change in my life. And I find a lot of my clients are similar to that. And so for me, what I found is I actually have, I started off when I first wrote Sacred Spaces. I had everybody wear that was reading the book wear a blue paracord bracelet because paracord is not going to, you can swim in it, you can shower in it, you can never take it off and it doesn't look gross after a while. As this constant reminder of, for the book Sacred Spaces, it was how are you going to pursue your marriage? What one thing can you do every single day and then have that bracelet represent that one thing, not five things, but one thing that you're going to do every day to pursue your relationship. And it was so effective for me and also everybody that was reading it. I had one wife who made a commitment for a whole year and it changed her whole marriage around. And it
Wow.
was so moving. I actually, you can now get bracelets. They're called permanent bracelets. And I actually have one where they literally weld this bracelet on your arm and you never take
Oh
it off.
gosh.
And so it is a reminder of it means different things to me at different times, but whatever it is that I am working on currently in my season, when I look down at my wrist, that is what that bracelet represents. It could be working on my health, it could be working on my spiritual life, it could be the commitment that I'm going to run 5 times a week. It just is what is the one thing that I'm focused on right now that it's not going to get put away in a shelf somewhere or put in my to-do list where I close my binder at the end of the day, but it is constantly on my wrist as a reminder of me working on something in my relationship or something for myself. And so that is mine. That is my tactical tool or my treasure that I'm really grateful for that keeps me centered.
I love that. And I like the fact that it's one thing.
Mhm.
Because how many times do you like make a to-do list of 5 things, or as we're at the end of the 2023 year, everybody has all these resolutions they're going to do for 2024, and they last like 2 weeks and then it's gone. So I love the one thing concept because how that's easy,
Yeah.
right? 5 things could be hard, but one thing is doable, you
Yeah.
know? And I love the fact that something represents it because it's like a constant reminder. And I think in the busyness of everybody's world, it's really easy to forget that one thing.
Yeah.
But all you have to do is just look down and it's like right
There.
there and it's with you every day. I love it.
Shame is never a good motivator. And sometimes our to do lists can feel very shaming. It's like, look at all the things that
Sure.
I've not accomplished or all the things that I said that I would do. Right. And it doesn't mean
Yeah.
that we don't work on those things, but I do find that if we're working on 2 or 3 things at once, like all of us are probably working on our health, especially going into, New Year's, right? Everybody's going to come up with resolutions, and that's wonderful. It's great to have 2 or 3 things, but it's also good for us to be focused on at least we are making progress in at least 1 to 2 areas and not shame ourselves for not being perfect at all things. And maybe I guess it's also a reminder to me that this is a process. This bracelet is welded. I know that sounds strange. You
Yeah.
have to look it up to see it. It is a constant progress. There's always going to be on my wrist. There's always something to work on, right? And so maybe that's a little bit of what we need too, is just the humility and grace for ourselves, that it's not about getting it perfect. It's about each day, did I make progress on something that was important to me, that was valuable? And tomorrow I'm going to make a little bit more progress. And that can be enough.
I love it. Yeah, true. You're right. I think some people can spend time beating themselves up, but
Mhm.
it's all about progress. And that's really life too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Life is a journey. It's all about progress. We're constantly changing. We're constantly trying to get better in certain areas. So very well said. I totally agree with you. So this has been just a lovely conversation. I so appreciate you coming on and giving us some insight into your 2 books and all the great work you're doing in this space, serving our military families, and it's really amazing. So before you go, how can people find all this amazing information and buy your books?
Yeah, no, the easiest way is just to go to CorieWeathers.com. My name is Corie, Corie. Weathers like the weather outside with an S. So CorieWeathers.com, or Google is probably an easier, faster way if you don't know how to spell it. But you can find everything from the books to the podcast to speaking events, that sort of thing. And even one-on-one coaching, if that's something that you're interested in, you can all find it all there on that website.
That's great. I like it. One stop shop.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. And I'm assuming that people can reach out to you there and connect with you.
Yes, my email address is there too. There's a contact form, but if you want an easy way, just even Corie at CorieWeathers.com, you can email me there. And yes, I would love to hear from anyone if this has been meaningful, or if there's something that you're interested in working with me, or just whatever. Just there's lots of options on there. Before I go, I think it's just on my mind to say, after our conversation just now, that I just finished today doing a session with a military couple, when really the thing that's top of mind for them in their season right now is working on their relationship and working on their marriage. And there's so many people out there where you're getting to the end of the year, or maybe you're starting, whenever this comes out, starting the next year, and maybe you just don't feel like you're where you want to be or where you should be. There's that word should. And, at the end of that session, regardless of how much conflict was going on between them, it came down to, were they willing to turn and face each other and just hold hands for just a second? And you would be surprised at how much of a connection you can find despite all of the conflict, by just reconnecting physically in that way. And that we sometimes make it so much harder than it needs to be. So there might be somebody that's listening today, that's maybe, when I talked about that tactical treasure, that, the relationship in your life is just really challenging right now and you wish it was better. And maybe that we don't make it so hard on ourselves, and we just take one tiny step of something that you can do, can bring so much hope to the moment. So if you're listening and that's you, just know that you're not alone in that either. This is a hard lifestyle. And Tracy, I'm so thankful that you would be willing to have this conversation and serve this community. It is a very difficult lifestyle, but that means we have to fight that much harder for our relationships and for the things that are important in our life. So thank you for being willing to highlight this and bring that, hopefully, that word of hope to other people.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for saying that. Marriage is difficult in itself, but military marriage, oh my gosh, my hats are just off to the military families and mil spouses and all that you do to support, your service member and everything. It's not for the faint of heart. It
Mm-hmm.
is not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just amazing what you're doing in this space. Um, and yes, if there viewers, listeners, take that advice, face each other, hold hands, go back and remember why you started in the first place. You
Yeah.
obviously were in love, and you probably still are.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of navigating things together. Yeah.
Connection
So
is everything, don't you think?
it is.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Tracy,
Yes.
for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on. Hello, viewers and listeners. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Tactical Treasures podcast. We just finished up an amazing conversation with Corie Weathers, who is an active Army milspouse of 14 years and a licensed professional counselor, sought after speaker, consultant, and author of 2 books. She also was named the 2015 Armed Forces Insurance Military Spouse of the Year. Aside from authoring several articles for mill.com, millspouse.com, and military.com, she is also the author of 2 books, Sacred Spaces, My Journey to the Heart of Military Marriage, and The Military Culture Shift. Like many military couples, Corie and her husband Matt, an Army chaplain, accumulated significant unshared moments during Matt's deployments. They called these sacred spaces, experience that each other could not fully understand but respected. The book follows her journey to the heart of her marriage, a place where she would have to leave her resentment behind in exchange for ground she and her husband had surrendered to hurt, misunderstanding, loss, and to Afghanistan. Her newest book, The Military Culture Shift, is based on more than 15 years of research, offering insights from the counseling office as well as perspectives on the effect of Department of Defense budget decisions, changes in generational views of authority, and emerging social trends within the military community post 9/11. To connect with Corie, learn more about the Life Giver podcast and clinician directory, and to order her books, go to CorieWeathers.com, and I'll spell that for you, CorieWeathers.com. Again, thanks for tuning into this podcast. And don't forget, you can find Tactical Treasures podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms as well as Vet TV. We are now airing on Reese Across America Radio on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. And if you miss that, please be sure to catch the encore on Saturdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can find Reese Across America Radio on the iHeartRadio app, the Odyssey app, and the TuneIn app. Thanks for joining us for this podcast. We'll see you soon on another podcast. Bye-bye now.